The sun hung high over the city, spilling golden light across the streets, but it couldn't warm the chill that wrapped around Marco already. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee and fresh bread from the bakery nearby, yet the scents brought him no comfort. Today, Marco was a man stripped of power, sitting alone in the world he once ruled with fear. He parked his sleek black car a few blocks from the restaurant, his hand trembling slightly as he pushed open the door. Pain lanced through his ribs, reminders of last night's attack. He'd been ambushed in a quiet alley, betrayed by someone he had trusted. His men? Gone. His empire? Vulnerable. And now, even here, in the heart of the city, the shadows of fear clung to him like a second skin. The restaurant loomed ahead, polished windows reflecting the morning sunlight. Inside, laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. The perfect scene for a normal day. But for Marco, it was a battlefield. He stepped toward the entrance, each step heavy, calculated. The doorman, a young man barely old enough to shave, froze mid-step, eyes widening in recognition. Marco's name carried weight, a reputation built on ruthlessness and precision. But today, that weight seemed useless. The man didn't move. He didn't even nod. He just stared. Inside, the restaurant hummed with life. Waiters carried trays of steaming pasta and glasses of red wine. Patrons smiled, whispered, clinked their forks. And then Marco entered. Time seemed to slow. The chatter dimmed at the edges, like a radio fading out. Eyes flicked toward him, recognition sparking. Some turned away, pretending not to see. A waiter paused mid-step, then shuffled in another direction. Tables subtly shifted, creating space between him and anyone else. Marco felt the first sting, not of pain, but of isolation. He had built empires, commanded armies, and yet, in this moment, he was invisible, or worse, unwanted. He took a deep breath, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Pride was all he had left. He was Marco Moretti, the man feared across continents, the one whose name had made kings tremble. And yet, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: vulnerability. A waitress approached, timidly at first, her eyes flicking nervously between him and her manager. Marco studied her, the way she hesitated, the slight quiver of her hands. A small, almost imperceptible hope stirred in his chest. "Good morning," he said, voice low but firm. The words echoed strangely in the suddenly quiet room. The waitress froze, then nodded curtly, retreating without a word. Marco's heart sank. This was no longer the world where respect, or fear, could open doors. Today, fear wasn't enough. Today, he was alone. He moved deeper into the restaurant, taking a corner table. He sat, adjusting his jacket over bruised ribs. Pain flared again, sharp and insistent. He clenched his jaw, staring at the polished wood of the table, at the flickering sunlight through the windows. Every sense was on high alert. He watched every waiter, every patron, every shadow. His mind raced, calculating, planning, remembering. Memories of betrayal pressed in like a vice. Friends who had vanished, allies who had switched sides, men he had trusted now plotting behind his back. Power is nothing without loyalty, he muttered under his breath, a bitter taste in his mouth. The words had never felt more real. He picked up a glass of water, swirling it slowly in his hands. The liquid reflected the sunlight, a fragile mirror of the life he used to control. He remembered his father, a man of fear and respect, teaching him the lessons of survival and dominance. Marco had learned well, perhaps too well, and yet, here he was, alone, powerless, unseen. A sudden movement caught his eye. Behind the counter, a new waitress appeared. She was young, Italian-born by the way she carried herself, but trained abroad, perhaps in the arts of charm and diplomacy. Unlike the others, she didn't flinch. She didn't whisper behind her hand. She simply looked at him, eyes steady, unafraid. Marco felt something stir, a flicker of recognition, a glimmer of hope. But hope was dangerous. Hope could be a trap. He leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully, analyzing every detail. Was she working for someone? Was this a setup? Or Could she be the first person in a long time to see him as more than a name, more than a shadow of power? The restaurant's quiet seemed heavier now, as if the air itself held its breath. Patrons whispered, glancing at him, then quickly returning to their meals. Marco's fingers drummed against the table. He felt exposed, fragile, yet alert, every instinct screaming that this day could change everything. And then, a sound that made him freeze. Buongiorno, signore. The words came soft, deliberate, in perfect Italian. Not a greeting of fear, not a recognition of notoriety, but a genuine, human acknowledgement. The waitress had spoken directly to him. Marco's heart skipped. The room seemed to shift. Every whisper faded into silence. He looked up at her, really looked, and in her eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen in years. Understanding, respect, and perhaps loyalty. For the first time that morning, he felt the faintest trace of relief. But relief was fleeting. The shadows of betrayal still loomed. His enemies had not vanished. The pain in his ribs was a reminder. The world had not changed. And yet, for a brief, shining moment, Marco felt a lifeline, someone willing to meet him not with fear, but with recognition. He leaned back, studying her carefully, every nerve taut, every sense alive. His empire had crumbled, but maybe, just maybe, this young waitress held a key, a chance to navigate the chaos, to survive. The city outside continued its rhythm. Sunlight streamed across the tables, untouched plates and glasses glittering. Marco took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world pressing on him. And yet, there was that spark, a spark that could ignite a plan, a path forward. But just as quickly, doubt crept in. Who could he trust? Who was working against him? Every friendly gesture might be a trap, every shadow a threat, and the clock was ticking. He swallowed, forcing his mind to focus. Power was fleeting, yes, but survival? Survival depended on trust, cunning, and the right allies. And in that moment, Marco knew one thing for certain. Today would change everything. The waitress's words echoed in his mind, the warmth of her voice a contrast to the cold isolation he had felt moments ago. He didn't know why, but he sensed that she was more than she appeared. And in the dangerous, unpredictable world he inhabited, that could mean the difference between life and death. He looked at her again, searching for clues, answers, a hint of loyalty. The silence stretched between them, electric and tense. Every second was a test, every gesture a measure of truth. Marco's hand twitched toward his jacket pocket, fingers brushing the cold metal of the phone. He was ready for anything, but he also knew that nothing in his life had prepared him for what this encounter might bring. And then, the waitress smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, and turned back to her tasks. She hadn't spoken again, but the words remained in his mind, echoing louder than any threat or warning. Buongiorno, signore. Marco leaned back, eyes narrowing, mind racing. Something had shifted, and he knew, deep down, that the rest of this day, the rest of this story, was just beginning. The restaurant hummed around him. Patrons returned to their meals, but Marco already sat in the corner, bruised, wary, and alert. He was alone, yes, but no longer completely powerless. Someone had acknowledged him. Someone had broken the silence. And in the dangerous world of betrayal, enemies, and survival, that was everything. Marco Moretti sat in the corner, his bruised frame rigid, eyes scanning every movement in the restaurant. The whispers, the cautious glances, the subtle retreats of staff, it all reminded him how far he had fallen. His reputation, once untouchable, now meant little in the face of fear and betrayal. But then, she moved. The waitress, Sophia, walked with a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with the tension in the room. Her dark hair was tied neatly, her uniform crisp, but there was something in the way she carried herself, a subtle authority, a calm certainty, that drew Marco's attention. Unlike the others, she did not avert her eyes. She did not flinch. She simply looked at him. Really looked. Marco's pulse quickened. He had been betrayed too many times to trust appearances, yet something in her gaze was different. It was neither fear nor judgment, but recognition, something that whispered, "I see you." Sophia approached slowly, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Every other sound in the restaurant seemed to fade. Patrons continued their meals, servers continued their tasks, but Marco's world had narrowed to this one person, this one potential ally. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice gentle but deliberate. The words were carefully chosen, measured, free of the fear he had seen in every other face today. Marco's lips pressed into a thin line. He studied her, his mind a whirlwind of suspicion. "Who are you? Why do you do this? Are you with them? Are you against me?" "I," he began, but stopped. Pride and caution clashed inside him. Saying anything too revealing could be dangerous. Saying nothing could isolate him further. He settled on a simple nod. Sophia smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, and gestured toward an empty table. "You should sit. No one will bother you here." Marco hesitated, then moved carefully to the table, the weight of his injuries pressing into his consciousness with every step. His hand shook slightly, not from fear of her, but from the exhaustion of being hunted, betrayed, and alone. As he sat, Sophia placed a glass of water in front of him. Her hand lingered for a moment, steady and reassuring. Marco's eyes met hers, searching for any sign of deceit. There was none. "You've been hurt," she said, softly, almost like a confession rather than an observation. Marco blinked. He was used to fear, threats, and commands. Compassion was foreign, uncomfortable. And yet, it stirred something deep within him. A memory of someone who had once shown him kindness. His mother, long gone, who had cared when the world only demanded respect. "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice low but sharp, controlled. "I'm Sophia," she said simply. "I know what it's like to be in danger, to be left alone when everyone else turns away. You're not the first person I've helped, and maybe you won't be the last." Marco studied her. The calm certainty in her eyes, the subtle authority in her posture, it was compelling. Dangerous, yes, but compelling. He didn't trust easily. He didn't trust anyone. Yet, somehow, he felt that Sophia was not just another observer, another whisper of fear in his empire. The restaurant seemed to shrink around them, the bustling day suddenly intimate and tense. Marco felt the weight of every eye on him, every whispered speculation. And yet, for the first time since the attack, he felt a faint glimmer of hope, a thread he could grasp. "Why?" he asked, the words simple, yet heavy with all the suspicion and curiosity he carried. Sophia's gaze softened, but her tone remained steady. "Because I can see you. Not the name, not the fear, but you, the real you. And because sometimes helping someone is the only way to survive ourselves." Marco's mind raced. He had spent years building walls, surrounding himself with fear and loyalty bought with blood. And now, this stranger, this waitress, seemed to pierce them with nothing but words and presence. He leaned back slightly, testing, analyzing, calculating. Could he trust her? Was this a setup? He had seen betrayal too close, too often, but he had also learned to read people. And her, Sophia, her sincerity rang true, subtle yet undeniable. The moment of tension was broken by a sudden movement. A man, tall and broad, with sharp features and a cold stare, entered the restaurant. Marco's eyes narrowed instantly. Recognition flickered in his mind. A figure from his past, someone who had caused trouble before. The instinct to protect, to fight, surged through him. Sophia noticed too. Her hand brushed lightly against Marco's arm, subtle but grounding. "Stay calm," she murmured in Italian. "I've got you." Marco's pulse quickened. He felt the electricity of danger, the thrill of survival. He realized then that Sophia was not just a helper. She was an ally, someone who could navigate the dangerous web he had become entangled in. The man's eyes swept the room, scanning, calculating. Marco's fingers twitched near his jacket pocket, a reflexive preparation for confrontation. But he hesitated. He had no plan, no allies, except Sophia. Her calm presence steadied him, anchored him. He trusted her instinctively, not because he had to, but because something in her presence demanded trust. And in his world, trust was rare, precious, and dangerous. The man took a few steps closer, but stopped short of Marco's table. Recognition passed across his face, subtle yet clear. Marco felt the tension coil in his chest, every nerve alive with anticipation. Sophia's eyes met his. "Do not move," she whispered, voice low and steady. "Not yet. Wait for me." Marco obeyed. He knew instinctively that any rash move could spell disaster. The room seemed to hold its breath as the man paused, scanned, then finally turned and left, his presence fading but leaving a trail of unease behind. Marco exhaled slowly, the first genuine breath he had taken since arriving. His body ached, his ribs screamed, but the tension eased slightly. For the first time, he realized that someone had truly come to his side, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but by choice. Sophia smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, as if she had known all along that he would survive the encounter. "You're not alone," she said. Simple words, powerful. Marco let himself feel the impact of that. Power had failed him. Betrayal had stalked him. Fear had surrounded him. And yet, here was one person who had stepped forward, unafraid, unshaken, ready to stand with him. For the first time, Marco felt a sense of possibility. Not safety. He knew that danger still lurked everywhere, but clarity, focus, a chance to fight back, to plan, to survive, and perhaps, in the chaos, to reclaim a piece of the power he thought lost forever. But the calm was fragile. Marco knew it. Every shadow in the city, every whispered rumor, every hand that had once shaken his with loyalty now held the potential for betrayal. The day was far from over, and the real challenges were only beginning. Sophia moved to the counter, returning to her work with quiet efficiency, yet keeping an eye on him. Marco studied her for a long moment, realizing that trust was no longer a choice, it was a necessity. And this unexpected ally, this waitress who had greeted him in his own language, might just be the key to survival in a world that had turned its back on him. His eyes scanned the room again. Patrons laughed, clattered silverware, and carried on with their day, unaware of the tension in the corner. Marco's mind raced, calculating, planning, analyzing. He knew that danger was never far, that enemies were always waiting, but for now, he was not alone. And in a world where trust was as rare as loyalty, this realization was as powerful as any weapon he had ever wielded. Marco leaned back, fingers drumming lightly against the table. He watched Sophia move among the tables, her calm presence a shield he hadn't expected. The fall of power was not the end. He realized that. Perhaps, with the right ally, it was only the beginning of something far more dangerous, far more controlled, far more calculated. And in that moment, Marco knew one thing with absolute certainty. Sophia was no ordinary waitress. She was a lifeline, and he would need every ounce of cunning, every fragment of trust, and every shred of courage to survive what was coming next. The shadows outside the restaurant stretched long, the day moving inexorably forward. Marco's pulse thrummed with anticipation and dread. Someone had chosen to help him when no one else dared. And that choice could change everything. The sun had climbed higher, its golden rays spilling into the restaurant, yet inside, Marco already felt the chill of uncertainty wrapped tighter around him. Even with Sophia's quiet presence, even with her calm assurance, the weight of danger pressed in from all sides. Every glance, every shadow, felt like it could hide a threat, a betrayal, or worse. Marco sat at the corner table, the glass of water untouched. His mind was racing, replaying every detail of the past few days. The attack, the ambush in the alley, the men who had vanished. Faces he had trusted gone, alliances broken, his empire, his power. It was all slipping through his fingers. He looked at Sophia. She moved behind the counter now, arranging cutlery, but her eyes never left him. There was something in the way she carried herself, quiet confidence, steady precision, that gave him a strange mix of comfort and suspicion. He still didn't know if she could be trusted, yet he felt compelled to watch her, to gauge her intentions. "Marco," she said softly, approaching him. "I know who tried to set you up." Marco's eyes snapped to her. His pulse quickened. Every instinct in his body screamed caution. "Who?" he asked, voice low, controlled. Sophia leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Not here. Too many ears. But I can get you the truth. If you trust me." Trust. The word felt heavy, almost foreign. Marco had learned the hard way that trust was a luxury for the knave, a weakness for the powerful. And yet the sincerity in Sophia's eyes was undeniable. He studied her. The restaurant bustled around them, patrons laughing, cutlery clinking, waiters gliding between tables. But a bubble of tension surrounded their table, a world separate from the ordinary day. "Explain," he said finally, his tone measured, cautious. Sophia's eyes flicked to the door, then back. "You were attacked by someone inside your circle, a man you trusted. Your lieutenant." She paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "He's working with outsiders, someone who wants your downfall." Marco's fists clenched beneath the table. Rage and disbelief surged, burning through his veins. Betrayal. Again. He had built his empire with blood and strategy, only to find that even the closest allies could turn. "Who?" he demanded. Sophia hesitated, a small frown crossing her face. "I can't reveal the name here. Too many people are listening. But I have information that can lead you to him, and to the ones behind the attack." Marco leaned back, his mind spinning. Every instinct screamed danger. Every moment in this city was a test. Every ally, or pretended ally, could be a threat. Yet Sophia, she had risked herself just by speaking to him. And that meant something. He took a deep breath, feeling the tension tighten in his chest. "All right, tell me, but carefully, slowly. Every word matters." Sophia nodded, her movements deliberate. She gestured toward the kitchen. "Follow me. It's private there. No one can overhear us." Marco followed, every sense alert. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and simmering sauces, an odd comfort in a place that could so easily become dangerous. The clatter of pans and the hiss of the stove formed a soundtrack to his thoughts, calculating, cautious, ready for any sudden threat. Once inside, Sophia turned to him, her eyes steady. "The man who betrayed you. He's not acting alone. He's in league with someone from outside your organization. Someone powerful, someone who knows your weaknesses." Marco's jaw tightened. He felt anger, frustration, and fear intertwining. He had faced countless enemies, yet the sting of betrayal from someone he trusted was deeper than any bullet wound. "Why are you telling me this?" Marco asked, voice low. "Why help me?" Sophia met his gaze evenly. "Because I know what it's like to be alone when everyone else turns their back. I've seen what happens when trust is broken, and I've chosen not to let that happen again. You need someone who sees you, not the legend, not the fear, the real Marco. That's why I'm helping you." Marco felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time, something dangerous and fragile. Hope. But hope was dangerous in his world. One misstep, one misplaced trust, and it could cost him everything. He studied her carefully, every detail, the calm in her stance, the certainty in her voice. He couldn't afford mistakes, yet something inside him told him that Sophia was different. That maybe, just maybe, she was the ally he needed. Sophia leaned closer, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. "The people who want you gone. They're watching your every move, every contact, every message. You can't trust anyone else right now, but I can help you navigate this. I know the city, the streets, the hidden paths, and I know how to find information they think is safe." Marco's mind raced. He felt the weight of the danger pressing in, the walls closing, the suffocating tension of being hunted. And yet, this knowledge, this guidance, could give him an edge, a chance to strike back, to survive. He swallowed hard. "All right," he said finally. "We do this together, but one wrong move, and I'll know." Sophia nodded, a faint smile playing at her lips. "I know, and I won't make a mistake." The air between them seemed charged with unspoken understanding. Marco could feel the trust, tentative, fragile, but present, forming in the space between them. It was a dangerous gamble, yes, but he had no other choice. Survival demanded it. Suddenly, a sound from the front of the restaurant made Marco stiffen. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, scanning the floor. Sophia's hand brushed lightly against his arm. "Stay calm," she whispered. "They're still here." Marco's eyes narrowed. His instincts flared. Danger had not left. It never left. He felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the pulse in his veins, the heightened awareness, the readiness for whatever came next. Sophia's gaze met his, unwavering. "We need to move soon. Information waits, but only if we act carefully." Marco nodded, understanding the gravity. The shadows of the city were deep, and betrayal ran like a river beneath its streets. But with Sophia at his side, perhaps he had a chance, not just to survive, but to reclaim a piece of the power he thought lost forever. The kitchen's quiet hum seemed to stretch longer than it should, every second heavy with anticipation. Marco's thoughts raced. Who can I trust? Who will betray me next? And most importantly, who is orchestrating all of this? He glanced at Sophia once more, her calm presence anchoring him in the storm of doubt and danger. She was no ordinary waitress. She was more than that, an unexpected ally, a lifeline in a world that had turned its back on him. But the tension remained, thick and suffocating. Marco knew better than to let his guard down. There were eyes everywhere, ears everywhere, enemies everywhere. And every piece of information Sophia had was a thread, one he had to follow carefully, or risk unraveling completely. He leaned back slightly, taking in the small, confined space of the kitchen. Steam from the stove curled in the air, carrying the scent of danger and possibility. Marco realized that this moment, this fragile alliance, was the beginning of something far larger, far more perilous. Sophia's hand rested briefly on his shoulder, a silent reassurance. "We begin tonight," she said softly, her voice almost lost beneath the clatter of the kitchen. "But remember, every step matters. One wrong move, and it could be the end." Marco's lips pressed together. Danger had never been so close, so tangible. And yet, he felt a spark, a tiny flame in the darkness, that perhaps, with the right moves, he could survive. Perhaps he could turn the tide. But shadows were waiting. Secrets were deep. And betrayal was always closer than you think. The tension coiled tighter, the air thick with anticipation. Marco knew this was only the beginning. Tonight, the real battle would begin. And with Sophia by his side, he would need every ounce of cunning, every fragment of trust, and every instinct honed by years of survival. The city hummed beyond the windows. Patrons laughed, unaware of the storm brewing in the corner kitchen. Marco Mareti's mind raced, heart pounding, every sense alert. He was alive, and for the first time in days, he felt the pulse of control return. Not complete, not certain, but enough to act. And he knew the shadows held secrets, and tonight, those secrets would begin to reveal themselves. The city streets were bathed in the amber glow of late afternoon, the sunlight glinting off the buildings and casting long shadows that stretched across the pavement. Marco Mareti's sharp eyes scanned the alleys, every movement, every flicker of shadow, alert and calculating. He had walked these streets countless times, yet today they felt like a labyrinth, a maze filled with unseen enemies and whispered threats. Beside him, Sophia moved with quiet confidence, guiding him through narrow side streets, avoiding the main roads crowded with oblivious pedestrians. Her knowledge of the city was precise, almost uncanny, as if every alley, every hidden doorway, had been memorized. Marco's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the thrill of survival, the rush of danger, the anticipation of the storm he knew was coming. "You're tense," Sophia said softly, her voice almost drowned by the distant hum of traffic. "Relax your shoulders. You won't survive if you waste energy on every shadow." Marco let out a slow breath, letting the words sink in. He knew she was right. Every muscle in his body was coiled, ready to strike or flee at a moment's notice. Trusting her was difficult, dangerous, but he also knew that hesitation could cost him more than any attack. "They're watching," he murmured, eyes narrowing. "Every step we take, they're tracking. Someone wants me gone, and I need to know who." Sophia's hand brushed lightly against his arm, steadying him. "Patience. The city speaks if you know how to listen, and I can hear things most people overlook." They moved silently, slipping through alleys where the sunlight didn't reach, passing old warehouses and shuttered storefronts. Every corner was a potential trap, every passersby a possible threat. Marco felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the coiled tension that had always accompanied danger. But Sophia's presence anchored him. She was no ordinary ally. She was his guide, his shield, and perhaps the only person in this city who truly understood the stakes. "Marco," she whispered, halting at the mouth of a narrow alley. "We need to talk about who betrayed you. But this has to be done carefully. One wrong move, and they'll know we're looking." Marco nodded, his mind racing. He had always faced enemies head-on, relying on intimidation, power, and fear. But this betrayal was different. This was subtle, hidden. It was calculated, precise. He needed more than brute force. He needed information, strategy, and allies who could navigate the shadows he no longer fully controlled. Sophia led him deeper into the alley, stopping at a small, nondescript door. She knocked in a specific rhythm, paused, and then pushed it open slightly. Inside, a faint light glowed, and a shadow moved to greet them. "This is where we start," Sophia said quietly. "Information flows through places like this. Quiet, hidden, unseen. The people here know what's happening in the streets, in the buildings, in the hearts of those who move in the shadows." Marco's eyes narrowed. Danger hummed through the air. Every instinct screamed that this could be a trap. Yet he had no choice. The pieces of his empire were scattered, his enemies were bold, and his options were shrinking by the hour. They stepped inside, the door closing softly behind them. The room was small, dimly lit, filled with stacks of newspapers, folders, and scribbled notes. The air smelled faintly of coffee and ink, a strange comfort in a place that reeked of secrecy. A man emerged from the shadows, eyes sharp and calculating. He nodded at Sophia, then at Marco. "I've been expecting you," he said, his tone neutral but cautious. Marco's hand instinctively brushed against the concealed pistol in his jacket, a reflex honed by years of danger. He didn't reach for it, not yet, but the threat was clear. Every muscle in his body was alert. "Who is he?" Marco asked, his voice low, careful. "Someone who sees the city as I do," Sophia replied. "He knows who moved against you, and why. But we must be careful. Information here is like fire. It can burn those who hold it if used recklessly." The man stepped closer, producing a small folder. "These are the details," he said, handing it to Sophia. She glanced at Marco before opening it, scanning the pages quickly. Marco's eyes followed her every movement. His pulse quickened as he read fragments of names, alliances, and movements, some familiar, some shocking. One of his trusted lieutenants had indeed betrayed him, aligning with rivals who had long coveted his empire. The betrayal was deeper than he imagined. He clenched his fists, the anger bubbling beneath his calm exterior. "So it's true," he muttered. "They've been waiting, watching, planning this for months." Sophia's hand rested lightly on his arm. "Yes, but knowledge is power. Now we can act." Marco's mind raced, calculating, analyzing. Each piece of information was a puzzle, each alliance a potential trap. He realized that retaliation would require patience, precision, and the right allies, people like Sophia, people who understood the shadows of the city. The man from the shadows spoke again, his tone serious. "There's one more thing. The attack on you. It wasn't random. They wanted a message. And the message is still out there. If you move too soon, or without planning, the consequences could be deadly." Marco's jaw tightened. Danger was everywhere, but the thrill of strategy, of survival, coursing through him. He felt the fire of determination rekindle, a dangerous and necessary heat. Sophia leaned closer, her voice a whisper only he could hear. "We need to move carefully. Tonight, You'll see who truly stands with you and who waits to strike again. Marco nodded, the weight of anticipation pressing down on him. He had faced enemies before, but the combination of betrayal, secrecy, and proximity made this different. Every step would be a test, every choice a potential life or death. The air seemed to tighten around them, charged with suspense. Marco's eyes scanned the dimly lit room, every shadow, every flicker of movement, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The tension was palpable, almost suffocating, but he felt ready. He had Sophia, he had knowledge, and he had the determination to reclaim control. And yet, just as he allowed himself a brief moment of focus, a sound from the street outside made him freeze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Someone was following them. Sophia's eyes met his, calm but serious. "They know we're here," she whispered, "and they're closer than you think." Marco's pulse raced. Every instinct screamed danger, every muscle coiled for action. The shadows were alive. Secrets were waiting, and betrayal. Betrayal was never far behind. He realized then that the real test was only beginning. Survival wouldn't come from brute force alone. It would come from strategy, trust, and the courage to face what lurked in the darkness. Marco took a deep breath, his fingers brushing the edge of the folder in Sophia's hand. He looked at her, a silent understanding passing between them. They would face this together. And together, they might just survive. But outside, the shadows waited, patient and deadly. And Marco knew this was far from over. The tension had only begun to build. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long, golden shadows across the city. Marco Moretti's heart pounded like a drum, echoing the tension in the streets. Every alley, every rooftop, every window could hide an enemy. He had spent the day navigating danger, uncovering betrayals, and relying on a guide he had never expected, a waitress named Sophia. And now, at last, the moment of truth had arrived. They stood on the rooftop of a dimly lit building, the city stretching below them like a living, breathing maze. Marco's eyes scanned the horizon, calculating every escape route, every vantage point. He felt the ache in his ribs from the previous attack, but it was nothing compared to the fire igniting within him. Today, he would confront the betrayal at the heart of his empire. Sophia stood beside him, calm, unwavering, her dark eyes reflecting determination. "Stay close," she said softly. "They know we're here, and they're watching. But we have the advantage. They don't know our next move." Marco nodded. He clenched his fists, feeling the surge of anger and anticipation. Betrayal had left scars, but it had also sharpened him. Every moment of doubt, every sleepless night, had led to this point. He would not be a victim again. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, imposing, yet familiar. Marco's breath caught. Recognition struck like a lightning bolt. His lieutenant, the man he had trusted above all others, stepped forward, eyes cold and calculating. "So," the lieutenant said, his voice smooth, dangerous, "you finally found your way here. I wondered how long it would take." Marco's jaw tightened. Rage bubbled beneath the surface, but he held it in check, his mind focused, calculating. "Why?" he demanded. "After everything, why betray me?" The man smirked, a cruel twist of lips. "Power is fleeting, Marco. Loyalty is expensive, and in the end, survival belongs to those willing to take it." Sophia's hand brushed lightly against Marco's arm, grounding him. "Stay sharp," she whispered. "Don't let emotion control you." Marco inhaled deeply, forcing his mind to focus. Every betrayal, every threat, every hidden hand now came into view. This confrontation would decide not only his survival, but the fate of everything he had built. The lieutenant stepped closer, and in a swift motion, drew a gun. Time seemed to slow. Marco's instincts flared, honed by years of danger. But before he could act, Sophia's voice cut through the tension, calm and deliberate. "Marco," she whispered in Italian, the words sharp and precise. "Now." Marco lunged to the side, narrowly avoiding the flash of metal. The shot echoed across the rooftop, bouncing off the surrounding buildings. Sophia moved with him, her presence steady, guiding him through the chaos. The lieutenant's expression shifted, surprise, then fury. He had underestimated them, but the rooftop was narrow, the angles dangerous. Marco's mind raced. Every step, every move, could be life or death. Go! Sophia hissed, pointing toward a narrow fire escape. Marco followed, adrenaline surging. They descended quickly, the city's pulse thrumming beneath them. Below, the streets were alive with movement, yet they were invisible among the chaos. Marco's senses were razor sharp. Every shadow, every sound, every flicker of light carried meaning. He could feel the danger closing in, but he also felt something he hadn't in days. Control. Sophia led him through a series of alleys, each turn precise, each path calculated. Marco realized then that she was more than a helper, she was a strategist, a lifeline, someone who understood the shadows of the city as intimately as he had once understood power. They paused briefly in a hidden courtyard, breathing heavily, the tension coiling in their chests. Marco's eyes darted around, scanning for threats, calculating their next move. They're not far behind, Sophia said softly. We need to keep moving. Trust me, I know the way. Marco nodded, following her lead. He could feel the lieutenant's presence looming, the danger never far. But Sophia's calm guidance gave him the edge. For the first time in days, he felt not just survival, but strategy, control in a world that had turned against him. As they rounded the final corner, Sophia stopped suddenly. She looked at him, her expression serious. Listen carefully, she said. There's a rooftop across the street with a ladder leading down to a hidden passage. It's our only way to get out unseen. I need you to follow my lead, every move exactly as I say. Marco's pulse raced. He trusted her, enough to risk everything, but he remained alert, every muscle tense, ready for the slightest threat. The ladder was precarious, the height dizzying, but they climbed swiftly, moving silently. Marco felt the sting of bruises and exhaustion, yet adrenaline carried him forward. Sophia's presence beside him was both anchor and shield, guiding him safely through the perilous escape. At the bottom, they emerged in a shadowed alleyway, unseen and untraced. Marco exhaled deeply, the tension in his shoulders finally releasing slightly. But he knew the danger was not gone, only delayed. The lieutenant and his forces would regroup, and the city would continue to hold threats at every corner. Sophia looked at him, her eyes meeting his. You made it, she said softly. For now. But remember, they're still out there. And they won't stop. Marco nodded, the weight of realization pressing down. He had survived the immediate threat, but the world he once ruled was fractured. Allies had vanished, enemies were bold, and the streets were unforgiving. Yet, in this moment, he felt a spark, a dangerous, fragile spark. Thank you, he said, voice low but genuine. I wouldn't have made it without you. Sophia's lips curved faintly. You didn't survive alone. That's all that matters. And now, you have a choice. The past can either destroy you, or it can make you stronger. You decide. Marco's eyes swept the city, golden light bathing the buildings, shadows stretching across the streets. He felt the pulse of the city, the rhythm of danger, and the weight of survival pressing against him. But he also felt clarity, focus, and determination. He realized then that power was not just about fear, wealth, or control. It was about choices, loyalty, strategy, and finding the rare few who would stand by you when the world turned its back. The sound of distant sirens and the murmur of the city reminded him that the world was alive, unpredictable, dangerous. But Marco Moretti, bruised, weary, and wiser, had survived. And he knew that with Sophia by his side, there was a chance, not just to endure, but to reclaim, rebuild, and strike back when the time was right. He took a final breath, letting the adrenaline fade slightly, feeling the weight of what had passed and the potential of what was still to come. The city stretched before him, full of shadows, secrets, and possibilities. And Marco understood. Survival was just the beginning. Sophia's hand brushed his arm once more, a silent acknowledgement of trust and partnership. Together, They disappeared into the shadows, unseen, untracked, ready to face whatever came next. And in that fleeting moment, Marco felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. But the city never sleeps, and danger never forgets.